This isn't about control anymore. It's about what's left after you lose it. I used to define power by how many hearts I could twist, how many conversations I could reshape with a glance or a whisper. But now I walk through hallways filled with exit wounds, not just in others, but in myself. This final episode is where the game ends and the reckoning begins. The systems I built, manipulation matrices, behavioral psychology triggers, cognitive skill exploits, they all turned inward. I'm no longer the architect, I'm the debris. Whispers of offshore accounts, admin probes, and digital trails I thought I erased are resurfacing. My greatest tools, NLP techniques, market psychology, even true body intelligence, they're failing me. And in the ruins of the persona I engineered, there's a question I can no longer outrun. Was it all worth it? If it cost me the right to be real? This isn't redemption. This is the aftershock of a life lived through other people's emotions. This is Exit Wounds. Oh, by the way, if you haven't already, we invite you to follow us on your favorite platform so you never miss a story. People think the end of the game is silence, but that's a lie. It's not quiet. It's not peace. It's echoes, relentless, repeating, unforgiving. They don't whisper you lost. They ask, was it worth it? And the worst part? You don't know how to answer. I used to think my legacy would be measured by how many people I could move, how many systems I could bend, how many hearts I could access and exploit with precision. Behavioral psychology, cognitive skills, dark psychology dressed in kindness. But now, my legacy lived in what I left broken. Not the ideas, the people. Jasmine never looked me in the eyes again. Rachel transferred schools. Even Tyler, the one who once called me his savior, now posts about ethical leadership and the danger of emotional engineers in modern education. Everywhere I turn, I see the exit wounds I left behind. Not scars, wounds, still open, still bleeding. And they weren't just in others, they were in me. The admin investigation began quietly. They called it an audit of behavioral concerns. But I knew better. Someone, likely Evan, had tipped them off. Probably handed them access to the folder I once buried under a false student wellness program. Inside were records of emotional targeting, fake peer reports, manipulated surveys, a detailed system of engineering stories for maximum social influence. All of it built on the backbone of work dynamics, group behavior modeling, and market psychology tactics I told myself were tools for leadership. But deep down, I knew they were the instruments of a con artist, not a leader, not a guide. A strategist with a god complex and a spreadsheet of emotional leverage. They gave me the choice: voluntarily withdraw from all student roles or face a formal tribunal. I chose silence because there was nothing I could say that wouldn't feel like another performance, and I wasn't sure I knew how to speak without manipulation anymore. In the quiet days that followed, I began reviewing everything I had once used to maintain control: my psychology tips, my NLP techniques, my notes on market emotions and true body intelligence. They all felt primitive, as if written by someone trying to study human emotion from the outside, like it was an algorithm, not a lived experience. I sat in the back of the school library for hours, watching real students live, laugh, cry, break, heal. No control, no scripts, no invisible hand guiding the outcomes. Just people, reacting, living, and I finally realized that was the power I never had. Because I didn't know how to exist without calculation. They say exit wounds are worse than entry ones, because they tear as they leave. They rupture everything in their path. And in this moment, in this aftermath, I am the wound. And the only person left to stitch it shut is me. I used to think the most dangerous lies were the ones we told other people. I was wrong. The most dangerous ones are the ones we archive, buried in old drives, tucked inside server rooms, left behind in anonymous emails, encrypted folders, abandoned accounts, because the internet doesn't forget, and neither do the people you built your power on. The first message came through an old dummy email I hadn't checked in years. Subject line: thought you might want to see what the world remembers. Attached was a single PDF, encrypted, named simply Mirror 7. When I opened it, my heart stuttered. It was a transcript, a full dump of a conversation I had staged, years ago, between two students to fracture their friendship. The log had been scrubbed, organized, tagged with behavioral notes, and included with a psychological analysis breakdown of my persuasion methods. But it wasn't written by me. It was written about me. Whoever had compiled this wasn't exposing the surface. They were analyzing the engineering beneath the manipulation. They had identified my pattern. Worse, they had mapped it. At the bottom of the PDF was a single link. Password protected. When I cracked the cipher, I found it. A hidden cache hosted through layers of rerouting, obscured metadata, randomized timestamps, offshore accounts, used not for money, but for data laundering. It wasn't just about breaking people. It was about storing the pieces, digitally, safely, remotely. Whispers of other conversations, surveillance files, archived recordings I thought I deleted. But someone had been watching me back, storing the evidence of my influence offshore, far from my reach. There were names, victims, confidants, co-conspirators, Jasmine, Elise, Tyler, Rachel, even Evan, each with detailed breakdowns of emotional states, known triggers, and cognitive vulnerability profiles. The work of a dark force. Maybe Evan, or maybe someone else I didn't even see coming. And within that database, one profile sat at the center, mine, tagged with primary source. Exhibits textbook con artist behavior, high-level cognitive psychology knowledge, operates through mirrored personas, danger to both self and others. I wasn't just being watched. I was being studied. For years, I called myself the master manipulator, the puppet master. But this wasn't a stage anymore. This was a lab, and I was the experiment. I slammed the laptop shut, tossed it across the room. But the sound that stuck with me wasn't the crash. It was the whisper inside my own mind that said, "You archived your lies so well. Even you believed they were gone." The worst thing about being a manipulator isn't being exposed. It's being copied. It's watching your tools and tactics take on lives of their own, spoken through mouths that don't know what they're saying, used by people who never learned the cost of control, only the thrill. This wasn't influence anymore. It was infection, and I was the original virus. After discovering the offshore mirror archive, I started seeing it everywhere. My words, my cadence, my techniques, persuasion methods I invented in private, now passed around like folklore. Someone was distributing them, not as warnings, as blueprints. In the hallway, I overheard a junior giving advice to a freshman in distress. Don't give them your truth. Give them a version they can't weaponize. That was my phrase, word for word. Used to be something I only shared with people I was grooming toward trust. Now it was locker room lingo. Psychological graffiti sprayed across the school's social infrastructure. In the cafeteria, I watched two students stage a fake fight, just loud enough to draw attention, just messy enough to feel real. 5 minutes later, a third student stepped in and gained instant social clout. I knew the sequence. I had choreographed that same scenario 2 years ago as part of a group behavior control experiment. Now it had become ritual. I sat alone in the art room that afternoon, staring at an old sketch of mine, a figure with 1,000 masks melting off their face, revealing nothing underneath. And I realized, my manipulation wasn't a legacy, it was a playbook. And someone, maybe Evan, maybe not, had uploaded it into the bloodstream of the school. No authorship, no permission, just echoes of the con. This was the consequence of emotional engineering. When you train people to weaponize trust, eventually they do it better than you ever could. And unlike me, they don't second-guess it. They don't feel the weight. Because I had felt it all. The deep emotions, the complex guilt, the hollowed-out space where my humanity used to sit before I learned how to silence it with cognitive loops. I was no longer haunted by the things I did. I was haunted by the people I taught. And now, they didn't need me anymore. They'd learned the only lesson that ever mattered. There is no such thing as connection, only leverage waiting to be converted. Redemption is a performance. At least, that's how I first treated it. Not as healing, not as honesty, but as a framework, a system, another structure I could build, this time not to manipulate others, but to manipulate myself. I started posting messages online about growth, talked about lessons learned, shared clips from podcasts on ethical leadership, emotional resilience, cognitive rewiring. I quoted professors of behavioral psychology I used to mock. I even referenced tools for transformation in public journals, terms like positive influence, forgiveness modeling, empathy-based guidance systems. It sounded noble. It sounded clean. But underneath every word was the same machinery I had always used: market psychology, reputation realignment, narrative control. You see, I hadn't stopped manipulating. I just rebranded it. This wasn't a moral breakthrough. It was ethical marketing, a calculated shift in public perception, repackaged with psychology tips, body language adjustments, and preloaded vulnerability phrases I'd tested in smaller conversations. Pain becomes purpose. I only hurt because I was broken too. We're all manipulators in some way. They weren't confessions. They were permission slips, and most people signed them without reading the fine print. But Rachel didn't. She saw right through it. We met by accident in the courtyard. She didn't say hello, didn't ask how I was doing. She just looked at me and said, "Do you still need to control the truth to feel safe?" I didn't have an answer, not an honest one, because deep down, I still believed that truth was something to be shaped, not lived. After she walked away, I stared at the ground for what felt like an hour, and that's when it hit me. Everything I had ever learned, every tool, tactic, reframing model, was still part of a system designed by fear. The fear of being ordinary, the fear of being forgotten, the fear of being honest without control. I wasn't trying to be better. I was trying to be believed. And that's not ethics. That's strategy. That night, I opened a blank document. I typed 2 words, no scripts. Then I stared at the cursor blinking for over an hour, because truth, unprompted and unstructured, was the one language I had never truly mastered. There's a moment, right before you speak the truth, when the silence is louder than anything you've ever manipulated. I sat alone. No lights, no scripts, no backup plans, just a recording device, a blinking red light. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know what I wanted the outcome to be. This wasn't an apology. Not really. Because apologies imply that the other person still matters. And I didn't know if anyone listening still did. Not because they weren't important, but because I had disconnected so completely from human emotion. I wasn't sure where the script ended and the truth began. I hit record, and I started to speak. My name doesn't matter anymore. You know me by the damage. You know me by the trust I broke, by the whispers I turned into weapons, by the way I smiled while planting knives in people's backs and calling it guidance. I didn't manipulate for fun. I did it to survive. Because the only thing that ever made me feel real was being inside your head. I watched emotions like a stock ticker, measured market dynamics in hallway glances. I played with cognitive psychology like it was chess. I wasn't a student. I was an algorithm built on behavioral predictions. And somewhere in the game, I lost what little I had left of being human. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I wouldn't know what to do with it. I just want this on record. I know what I did. And if this story ends with silence, I accept it. Because maybe the final form of control is letting go completely. I didn't edit it, didn't re-record. I saved the file, titled it final.mp4. No drama, no goodbyes. I didn't send it to anyone, just let it sit. Because sometimes the most honest thing a manipulator can do is stop talking. The next day, I walked through the halls. No one looked, no one spoke. But for the first time, that didn't feel like punishment. It felt like release. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beginning. Not of a new story, not of redemption, just of nothing to hide behind. And in a life built on strategies, nothing is the scariest kind of freedom. I used to be the voice inside the room. Now I'm just the silence that follows it. And maybe that's what I needed all along.